Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds.
Have I told you about my pen pal? The shopkeep up in Glasgow. I like to send him emails, and I ask him what's the strangest thing he's sold that week. He then makes up a completely ridiculous concept, and he sends it back to me. Must be something in the water, because he's very good at it. This week, he claimed that a Portuguese sound and media artist shipped him a Euro rack module which creates control voltages based on the physics of a marble rolling around on a table. He followed that with a module which converts your heartbeat into a clock and voltage source. And finally, a module that allows you to manually starve the voltage supplied to two other modules until those modules begin to go berserk. They also receive patch cables made of gold and the Bleep Labs Deladius 2 Banana Jack Bonkers desktop delay and sampler collab between Bleep Labs and Daedalus, the 18th century dandy chap who makes hip-hop on Ninja Tune. I do enjoy our conversations, but I think Jason's marbles have been rolling around on the table a little too much. So for all your extremely weird but actually real synth desktop effects and modular needs, visit signalsounds.com. That is signalsounds.com. Why? World, I hope you're okay. You're okay. I hope you're not ill. Are you ill? Don't be ill. I hope you're not ill. If you're ill, I hope you're okay. Thank you for being patient while I make more podcasts. I've been managing my life. We are putting together our house and things are happening. And in my new house, I'm going to have a new studio and it's going to be glorious. But I hope you're okay. I think things are going to get worse. A lot worse before they get better. So I trust that you are well, safe, and keeping a distance. As electronic musicians, we are uniquely placed to self-isolate, although we do sometimes have families. So I hope that you are looking after yours, or they're looking after you. And thus, again, a chat. We have a chat today with Mr. Music Thing. Despite it being March when this is released, this announces a third year of bleeping podcasts. This is the third time I have sat down with Tom Whitwell in his shed in Herne Hill to talk about stuff. And of course, just like the previous chat, there isn't really an agenda, although there kind of has been. Aside from this whole viral thing, previous to the viral thing, there was a slight thing about a thing. There was a company who published the thing, and that thing got a lot of news recently. And that's also why this is partly taken time to edit. I recorded this just before Christmas. Around about the day, I saw that a company announced a curvy injection molded Eurorack case with 3 amps of power in 3 zones, along with a kickstand that, in my entirely personal opinion, strongly reminds me of the form factor and power features of the Tip Top Audio Mantis curvy injection molded case with a kickstand that also has 3 amps of power distributed in 3 zones. But of course, that Tip Top case is prohibitively expensive. It's a barrier to entry. But a Mantis case costs less than a Mimia phone. So on what planet is that expensive? I think we have IKEA to blame, and the fact that we misjudged the size of the market, and many other factors. So once again, the B word has been in the news, and this time, courtesy of the whole cork sniffer thing, which has really added to my opinions of the company. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say something, which is that I believe nobody can reasonably argue that a lack of access to technology or vintage synthesizers is holding back anyone's creativity who truly wants to make music. Every single one of us listening to this now is listening to it through a computer or through a phone capable of limitless musical experimentation and joy, using software that is either free, completely free, or insanely cheap, that could be made tactile by a MIDI controller or two, costing less than a computer game, or with a hardware synth, which you could buy for less than the price of a games console, or even, actually, the price of a game. Audio interfaces, synthesizers, microphones are made in their thousands at any and all price points, and they have been for many years by many different companies. From Korg's Monotron to the Tribe, to a whole era of Volkers, decades of MFB analog synths, the MS-20 Mini, to everything Doepfer have ever made and make, from the Mini Brute to the Micro Brute to the Micro Freak, Minotaur, the Workstat, the Model 15 app, and every single piece of software that Arturia and others have ever made. There are an ocean of options available to you as a musician, both new and old, and especially secondhand. I think a little money goes a long way in music making and has done over the last 15 years, and all from companies where I don't need to enter a moral K-hole while I watch one of their launch videos. Anyhow, I hope you'll enjoy the hangout with Tom. We do indeed talk a little bit about this B word, of which Tom has a very good take. And moving on, and by way of exclusive, Tom also reveals a host of interesting things, music things, that he has been working on and tinkering with over this last year, not all of which are modules. So it is a little bit of a reveal fest. And unfortunately, even in the video, you can't really get a good look at all of these things, but we do talk about what they are. So he has got stuff up his sleeveys. Appropriately also, we chat about the costs of modules. We actually genuinely get into like how much would these new things actually cost him to produce, so we can start thinking about, are you being overcharged? What does that actually mean? We also talk about the National Grid, visiting an anechoic chamber, Marta Salogni's studio, about getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and shitposting. But don't worry, not in that order. I will talk more after the podcast. But first, let's talk to Tom. Thanks. So this is now the third year that we've sat together. I think it's quite sweet, really.
And last year it was exactly the same day. It was the 15th last year.
Was it?
Yeah.
15th of December?
I think so.
You checked your diary.
So it's all after, it's just after your Christmas party. And my Christmas party.
That makes sense. We're always ever so slightly hungover when we have these conversations. And it's obviously it's been like 3 years of a podcast, but it's also been 10 years. 10. We're now entering the 20s, the roaring 20s.
Yes.
Which is quite a weird thought. I was looking at Behringer again as a topic that we talked about last year, but it made me laugh because I was like, what did Tom say about Behringer in the music thing days? And it was 2008. It was nearly... it was 10 years ago. It was basically 10 years ago.
At least, yeah.
And you obviously...
Well, that was when I did that, I did an April Fool, which was Behringer releases I can't remember what I said the price was, something like a £250 Mini Moog.
Yeah.
And a £250 Synthy AKS. And so Uli, if you're listening, we would like the Synthy.
Yeah. I mean,
if you actually produce that, we will stop complaining about the clones.
I think that I have such, and I've been voicing my opinions about this. I mean, I think I actually cut out a lot of what we complain about, or I was sort of my pissing and moaning from last year. I was just like, it's because I recognise that people just don't want to hear it.
No. It
is a really weird situation where I feel, without sort of being like an armchair philosopher, that the sort of Behringer thing it reminds me of a lot of things that are happening in the world. It has echoes of the sort of political... There are certain things that I have seen him post.
That kind of, shit posting that is a very disconcerting... It's very disconcerting when people do it. I literally had, during the election, I had my son coming and showing me a Conservative Party post that said, vote Conservatives in Comic Sans. And he was just like, he couldn't understand what it meant. What was the point of it? And the point is to get a reaction. He looked at it, he reacted to it, he was showing me it, people would have shared it, people have tweeted about it, and he was like, but why have they made it look bad? Because
how they did it, and it was by then.
It's a proper Conservative Party thing, and that was one of the lessons I think from was it New Zealand or the Australian election where they learned a lot of that stuff of just, if you do something that is deliberately terrible, it can be really successful because people pay attention to it.
Just go like,
and your supporters aren't going to carry the way. Your opponents are going to get infuriated and mad and do crazy things, or they will go. Maybe it's they will go. We have to be really, really sincere and serious, and just focus on our policies. And be really straight down the line. Meanwhile, you're having fun. You're putting stuff out. Your supporters get the joke. Your opponents get angry and become more and more earnest and go on more and more about their policies.
Yeah, which alienates
everyone.
Yeah.
So it was, but it's a very disconcerting. I mean, it all comes from that Russian stuff. There's that amazing. There's a book called. I think it's. I can't remember exactly. It's by Peter Pomerantsev. It's a book called something like "Everything is True and Nothing is Real" or something like that. And it's all about that Russian thing where they will have propaganda channels that just say everything is terrible. So they will say there is much more crime in Russia than there really is. There is much more chaos in Russia than there really is. Because the answer to that is you need a strong man. The answer is not, well, our leaders can't be any good. So it's really interesting that, it's a completely different way of understanding the world from the sort of what we grew up with, really.
Yeah. I was reading the Create Digital Music post where he's talking about, the whole Behringer thing. And it's the sort of phrase that he used, which sort of slightly alarmed me, but is true, is where he says, they have managed to control the narrative and rewrite that basically what they have done is made everyone forget that they did not invent cheap synths.
Yes.
People now think that Behringer invented cheap synths, unaware that actually that was something that a number of other companies have done in the last 10 years, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I bought in something like 2010, probably, an MFB Synth 2, which is a German company, Manfred, I can't remember his name, in Germany, Berlin. And it is entirely a mini Moog clone. It's a small, it's got 3 oscillators.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's, and was really, there's a little sequencer built into it and was really nice. And I think they cost about 350, 400 pounds and completely boutique, completely, handmade. And like anyone else, clearly made cheaply. It's got cheap pots on it, it's got a cheap plastic box because it has to be, and because the electronics isn't the expensive bit.
Yeah.
It's the hardware around it.
Yeah.
Which we must return to because I have a very good example of that.
Of the hardware?
Of the difference between... In fact, I'll show you now this thing. So,
just for those who are listening, can you describe what this is?
So what it visually is, it's a kind of big-ish module. It's like 18 HP or something like that across.
Yeah.
And all it's got on it is 4 knobs. 4 big knobs. Essentially, it came from looking at all these teeny tiny modules, and I have lots of kind of teeny modules,
like
2 HP ones, or the sort of super dense, the sort of where people have made these super dense like clouds or super dense elements that are really useful and fit in a small case, but are quite difficult to control.
Ergonomics, yeah.
And I thought it would be interesting to have something that had big knobs and put out voltages.
Big knob energy.
So literally, it's like a MIDI controller for a Eurorack.
So it's basically like 4 master controls.
It's 4 voltage outs. You can change the range. Oh,
yeah.
Somebody at the door.
Okay. The module just to check. Okay.
So you can change it. You can have like 0 to 5, 0 to 10, -5 to
that's good. Yeah.
And it's got a couple of attenuators on there. Otherwise, you can put something in and attenuate it. But I found it really interesting to have one in a case because essentially you make a complicated patch, then you run a few voltages into there, and then you just sit there playing with that, and you're then steering interesting things with it. It's kind of, you have to just move it and see what effect it has on sound. So it's almost like the journey sort of we took with your own hardware where people are like, I don't want to be looking at the screen anymore.
Yeah.
This is almost a step, it's like I'm just turning these and listening with my ears to see what happens to the sound. The hardware thing of it is obviously a very, very simple. So it's got a bunch of cheap, actually, let me show you how they come.
This is the PCBs.
But that costs, very little to produce that board. But then when you come to make the thing up, the pots on the back. So I was like, I want to have nice. This is literally 4 knobs. They're quite good knobs.
They need to be good.
So they're nice, fancy, expensive pots. Then the knobs on them. So this one's got the kind of, big buckler ones that are, again, really nice to use. This one here, these pots are £15 each.
Oh my God.
So that has got... I was about to... 60 quid's worth of pots, of knobs on it.
This is
so I don't think we'll be selling them.
Do you know, I was going to tell you, I actually quite like these. Are nice.
They are very good.
I prefer them to these.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
They're also...
How can they be £15?
I don't know. They're made in America. They're not very popular.
Bakelite. Have they got lead in them? And
I don't know. Stuff. I mean, it may well just be that they are not very many of them about, and that's how much they cost.
Can you comment on? Because I think this is, as a manufacturer, and something that I am interested in. Is it true to say that in all of Eurorack, the most expensive part is everything above the PCB, i.e. the panel and the knobs and the sockets?
So these have been built with aluminium PCB panels, which are pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And they don't feel, I think when we sell these, we'd sell them with proper aluminium panels. You get these aluminium PCBs that are used for LED lighting because they act as a heatsink.
Oh, okay.
But you can obviously just ask them to do other things with them. So the panels, I think for a big one like this, I don't know exactly because Steve Thonk orders them, but I imagine that would be somewhere between kind of £8, maybe £15 for just the aluminium. The pots behind the knobs are these ones are about £4 each because these are posh, nice ones. Maybe £3 or £4 each. The switches are probably about £1 or something. Yeah, because you want decent switches. And so and then the knobs. These ones are ridiculously expensive. These ones are still probably a few pounds each. And the reason why Behringer can do it so cheaply is because of this vast economies of scale. So if I'm buying, the circuit boards will cost essentially nothing. The population will cost very little. The hardware, if you're buying at a big enough scale, will cost much less. And the manufacturing,
especially if you own the equipment to like bend metal and laser cut, it's it's similar to what Rode do. Here we are using a Rode NTSF1, Rode have invested literally millions of dollars to buy the equipment that you would otherwise have to hire, the use of. Yeah. And so it's hugely expensive in the forefront, but then you can begin to reduce down a product into its raw material cost. Yeah. They literally mill brass tubes to make make shotgun lights. They're not actually buying those from the company, so they can sell it a lot more cheaply, but it's still the same product.
Because microphones had that incredible price drop. It used to be microphones would cost £1,000, £2,000. They'd be made in Germany,
but they were made like Swiss watches.
Exactly.
It's a similar thing.
And they would have made in tiny, tiny numbers because nobody could buy only the BBC and recording studios could buy them. And then I guess Chinese manufacturers were able to start or realized that you were able to start making them at that scale, and then suddenly hobby studios would have proper condenser microphones and then proper that equipment. So
I think no one denies that it's a wonderful and amazing thing, and we still have a market for high-end microphones, just as there will be there is. And that's, I think, is one of the interesting things is in the last few years we're actually starting to get semi-high-end synthesizers again, which is sort of it sounds like an elitist thing to say, but it's just a comment that the fact that we for many, many years have not had like high-end. We've sort of almost. This industry has become, the effects of mass production have started to rub off on the sort of world of electronic music and studio equipment. We have things that are cheaper than they ever were, vastly cheaper than they ever were.
Everything is cheaper than ever was.
Everything is cheaper.
Even vintage synths are cheaper than they ever were. Yes. When you look at inflation.
Yes, they are.
I think probably I'd imagine a Mini Moog is about the same price, if not less, than it would have been when you bought it.
I actually worked this out. Yeah. So that when Moog reissued the Mini Moog, which, and then it was £3,500 to buy ones. I've stopped making them, but when they, it was $3,500. I am fairly sure, and I probably should double check my numbers, but I worked out that it was the equivalent of $8,000 to buy an original Mini Moog.
Well, that's what I mean. And actually, you can go and buy the highest end, most expensive, restored vintage 1972 Mini Moog from Soundgas for $5,000 now. Yeah. Which is still cheaper than it would have been.
Still cheaper than it was
back
new.
Then.
Exactly.
And you can have the app on your phone, and you can have the £250 Behringer one. You can have whatever.
You've got the choice.
The other thing that gives me kind of sort of confidence about this world is the guitar pedal world. So in guitar pedals, you've been able to get £30 guitar pedals, and you've been able to get £500 guitar pedals with the same literal internal circuitry, and there are markets for both of those.
Yeah.
And the idea that you should get angry because somebody's making a £300 guitar pedal, or you should get angry that somebody's making a £30 guitar pedal, it's just the scope of the market. And the point is, all of this can be done with free software on your laptop.
Yes, absolutely.
And it has been for 10, 15 years. All of it is a luxury for music making.
It absolutely is.
It's a thing you want to own physically. And whether you want to own a £30 thing or a £300 thing or a £3,000 thing, there will be changes in the market and how the market works. But it doesn't feel like it's a fundamental, like an existential crisis for the market either way. People will go on the internet and say stupid things. And that is not economics. That's not something else. That's, if you're somebody who has just discovered Behringer and you see a whole bunch of kind of gatekeepery older people saying, that Behringer is bad, you should do this, you will react angrily and say those people are ripping us off. And that's not a real thing. That's just a reaction that people are going to have.
Well, people just don't know, no one likes being challenged, it puts people on the defensive.
No one likes being made to look stupid.
And it's also, it's the thing Peter Kern was saying, and I think rightly, he's, it's this thing that if you shit talk them, people probably own some of their products. I mean, you've got a Behringer cable tester, and it's, you're effectively shaming people.
Yeah. And I'm showing myself about that.
But it's
quite happy to.
But and people they're not going to respond to you. No. And they're going to become defensive and upset and justify their actions. And the bottom line is, I can, if I rewind the clock, I have more disposable income than I did when I was 16.
Yeah.
If I could have bought an SH101, or even at the time, I mean, the irony is I could have bought an SH101 at the time for about £250. Yeah. But the fact that Behringer are making an SH101 that's £250 and it's full size, I mean, that is amazing. Yeah, and that is a wonderful thing. I'm not denying that. It's just, unfortunately, he doesn't have a sort of, there's no filter so that he will make that, but then he will also literally, instead of designing his own take on the concept of a box, which is not, there are options, designing a box, I would say, is not the most steep design challenge to come up with a slightly original box.
Yeah, just again, it's guitars all along. The model is there, and the model of being able to say, I can buy a Mini Moog with a Moog label on it, and I can buy it for £500, I can buy it for £1,000, I can buy it for £3,000.
I totally.
One of them's hand knitted by somebody. One of them's got £45 knobs on it.
Yeah, the other one's got your
The other one's got £10 knobs, and one of them's got 20p knobs, and they're all moulded, so they look roughly the same. But the nicer ones are nicer. It's a very difficult, market, and when it's filtered through the kind of internet angry filter, it becomes tiny boutique guy in Berlin making Surge modules is terrible capitalist ripping people off, and guy running a enormous plant in China is somehow a hero
patron
of the
saint of
people.
synthesizers,
and neither of them are quite right.
Yeah. So what have you done in the last? Let's stop talking about Behringer.
Must have been just about this time last year when we last met.
You didn't have a beard as well.
I didn't have a beard. No, I have grown a beard.
So more rural.
I don't know if you can.
Oh, is this ASMR?
Well, actually, one of the things I did this year was I went to a anechoic chamber. which is. Have you ever been to Anechoic?
Yes, I have been. I've been at the Road Factory. I stood in the Anechoic chamber, and it was.
So how did you find it?
Unsettling.
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing. Like, there is nothing like it, because it is just the only thing that's like it is a vast open space that is completely going to like the salt flats in Utah is probably the only thing. And in fact, I've been to the Genelec factory, and I chatted to one of their sort of engineers. He was like, we test subs on the lawn because there's only one boundary, but in an anechoic chamber there's no boundary, and you have that thing where if you turn away from someone, they can't hear you anymore. You have to look at each other to speak, because you've got no reflected sound. It is spooky.
So I was the story, the very old John Cage story that he seems, I think, have told many times, but where he goes to an anechoic chamber and he comes out and says to the engineer, "It's not working properly. What's gone wrong?" And the engineer says, "Well, what do you mean? What did you hear?" He says, "Well, I heard two sounds. I heard this kind of low, kind of rumbling sound, and I heard this very high pitched sound." And the engineer tells him, "The low rumbling sound is your blood moving around, and the high pitched sound is your nervous system." Now, this has actually been, somebody's gone through this in some detail with doctors, and they said this is simply not true.
You just can't hear.
You cannot hear your blood going around, and you cannot hear your nervous system.
I didn't hear my blood.
No,
I've heard that before, and I was like, I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think
I hear my tinnitus, my sort of ear ringing ever so slightly.
The thing I was actually, before I was, so I had literally for, I think it was Christmas last year, I said to my wife, what I would like for Christmas is to go to an anechoic chamber.
Wow.
And so she looked around and found there is one in London, which is at UCL's linguistics department. And it's a tiny one. It's really small. It's inside, probably smaller than the room we're in now, once you've included. It's got these very DIY looking,
coney baffles,
sort of cone things.
Yeah.
When you see pictures of anechoic chambers, they're often incredibly slick and black and high tech. This literally looks like it was made by students, which I think it possibly was. And so you've got the baffles, and then you've got a metal grid over them, so you can walk around, and so you don't bump into them.
And did you walk on mesh on the floor as well?
Mesh on the floor. Yeah. And this just had then one comfortable chair.
Oh wow!
But was a tiny room. So we turned up, had a nice chat to the tap, and then we went in. I didn't completely notice that if you turn your head away, you can't hear what they're saying. Yeah. But you noticed really that it was very, very directional. So like if you do that, you can't hear your fingers moving. Then you do that, and suddenly it appears.
Oh wow! Oh, you can't hear in your front of your face.
Yeah, I think it was like that. You wouldn't hear because
your face reflecting the sound past your ears.
And then we sat down. Everyone else left, and you turn the lights off. So you were just sat in there by yourself for about 10, 15 minutes.
He left you in the dark.
Yeah.
So like a sensory deprivation type.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're completely dark. And in fact, I then realised my watch had little glowing things. I took my watch from my pocket because you could see that.
And you'd hear it ticking as well, probably.
And the thing, I was really pleased because my tinnitus wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be.
Okay, good.
I was expecting to just hear this kind of roaring tinnitus. I found you could really hear the muscles and bones in your neck. When I turned my head left and right, I could hear this kind of crunching, grinding sort of noise. I didn't get any of the sort of, people have talked about it being kind of, claustrophobic or enclosed, or people worrying. I was totally fine. You sat there for 10, 15 minutes, and then he only kind of taps this, we're coming in, and close your eyes because we're going to turn the lights on.
Wow.
But it was really interesting. The other thing I felt, I've been wearing nice ear-cancelling headphones for about a year or two. And I remember the first time I put those on, you have that really kind of weird experience where you almost feels like pressure on your ears or something. Yeah. You get this very kind of striking effect that now, more times, you don't really notice it as much. I do wonder if that, wearing noise-cancelling earphones in a quiet room is actually as low a noise floor as you might get in an anechoic chamber. And actually, if the surprise and the real shock that someone like John Cage, where he was living in New York at the time, and he then goes out of sort of 1960s New York into the first place he's almost ever experienced silence in his life. I do wonder if the experience of that artificial silence you get from noise cancelling headphones has kind of made it seem less weird and less extreme to me than it was otherwise.
I think it's good that silence is something that you can achieve.
Yeah.
Like that is actually in many ways a luxury, and especially in cities.
Yeah.
And I've now left, in the last few years I left London, I now live in the country again. And, there have been times when I've been for a walk and, there's absolutely no wind and you just stop. And you're like, holy shit, it is quiet. And then, of course, there's other times where you sit out in summer and it's like, just like noise everywhere. But true silence, you can't, you'd have to manufacture it.
We have the planes going overhead. Yeah. So every 90 seconds during the day.
Although, after a time, and my auntie and uncle live in Chiswick, and they're over like the, Heathrow fly zone. And we sit in the garden there, and the first one, you're like, God, that's loud.
Yeah.
But after 10 minutes, they don't make a sound anymore. It's the same, but they do. It's weird. You become acclimatized to it.
And when it was the Icelandic volcano,
yes,
and all the planes stopped,
the unpronounceable.
That was very, very noticeable here.
Yeah,
because suddenly there was just something missing that wasn't what you expected.
Yeah. It's weird. Yeah, silence is. I don't know if it is as. I think I would have thought that an anechoic chamber is actually quieter than what can be done with.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody watching this, listening to this, will know and can tell us.
And did you feel sort of, like I have actually been to a sensory deprivation tank before and done that, and I would, bought a house. And we've got to do it up and stuff. And I just said to my wife, I was like, so the sensory deprivation test, where's that going to go in the house? She's like, you're not having one of those.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, actually, I genuinely believe that if you did have access to a sensory deprivation tank on a regular basis, but as a meditative facility, it's incredible. Like, I felt amazing after.
But is that one when you're lying in a bath? Or is
yes.
Okay, that one.
So and the place that I went, it was more like a little. It's not like a creepy tank where although the tanks do not have latches, you can always open them and stuff. But it was more like a little mini bathroom, and then there's about 12 inches of water. Yeah. And it's full of Epsom salts. So
you float really.
So you float like you're in the Dead Sea. And so you get in this thing, you get all your kit off. You have special cotton in your ears because you don't get salt in your ears and stuff. And so, and you just lie in the thing and they kind of play a bit of music in, with aquatic speakers just to sort of let you know. And then the music fades out. Yeah. And if you sort of place yourself, you just kind of sit and there's no part of you that's touching the walls. There's no part of you not touching your bum's not touching the floor, and you just like that you're in silence because you're underwater as well, and you're just floating. And it, if you can meditate,
and you loved it,
I thought it was. I was in there. I don't know how long, 40 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Come out, you have a shower, and obviously meditation itself will give you that kind of mental, sense of airiness. I think regular meditation has the ability of just raising your base level of happiness. Is sort of the way that I've thought about it in the past. And even just 40 minutes in that little room, I came out like floating.
Wow.
And it's not something that I think a lot of people think it's sort of a bit like wacky and new age and a bit sort of like not, it's like, well, that's ridiculous.
So you think you need one on every corner like tanning shops?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think that they're a better force for good than tanning shops.
I think there is one opposite my office actually, so maybe I should go and...
You should 100%. Like that should be your Christmas present this year is go and literally go in 40 minutes in one of those. And I thought it was great, but it's just not something. It's an expensive thing. It's something like 60 quid or 50 quid for a session because it's low volume. We need a Behringer sort of to democratise
a big bucket that you got to sit in. easy float. Yeah. So that reminds me. We had CV Freaks. So I did talks again. So the last speaker was Marta Salogni. I don't know if you know her.
So I've heard of Marta, but and it was really I didn't realise that she was involved in sort of like the mad sound design, like all that stuff that she was. I had no idea that's what her sort of discipline.
She was fascinating. So she is a rising star of music production engineering. She's kind of engineered and mixed people like Bjork and Frank Ocean and loads of these big records, and has also done lots of interesting smaller records that I sort of had been following her on Twitter or Instagram or something, and you just discovered these quite interesting, unusual records that you wouldn't necessarily heard about, and then sort of triangulated and realised that's how you'd heard about them because they'd come through her. But she did this talk where she's obviously very busy, and I was trying to work out what to get her to do because she, wasn't. I don't think was going to want to prepare a sort of 25-minute, half an hour talk like some people do. So I said to her, just take pictures of your studio space where you work, and then we'll put them up on the screen and you can talk through them. And she did this. It worked really well, and it was all about this space she works in, where she has her big, console, and there's a whole story of how she found this Tascam console from not Tascam, Revox, I think. Anyway, can't remember. A big console. But it was also things like she will have the books because she's like, you've got to rest your eyes from, if you're looking at a screen the whole time and you're mixing, you, rather than then stopping and then looking at your phone for a bit, you should stop and then look at a piece of paper and just, rest your eyes properly and separate it. A lot about the plants that were there in the space. She's got lots of plants in there. And it was just about setting up a space in which she could work and a space that she could kind of, the way you optimize that space. But also she basically collects old reel-to-reels as well.
Nice.
So there's one where she was telling the story of buying this crazy looking kind of almost sort of Art Deco looking reel-to-reel that she bought. And it arrived with a piece of tape on it. And she listened to it. And I think she said it was kind of spoken word or it was somebody reading poetry or something. She's just left that tape on it the entire time.
Absolutely.
And she will perform with that piece of tape, then reading something over the top of it and treating that. So it was that amazing, these kind of nuggets that you find a bit like when it was Superbooth, 2 or 3 Superbooths ago, where Chris Randall, who does Audio Damage, was wandering around the old buildings. This was when it was at Funkhouse.
The very first, yeah.
And he found this reel of tape left in one of the buildings and came and gave it to me because I had I had that tape head module.
Oh, you did, yes, yeah.
And we played it back on the, and it was this tiny snippet of what would have been an Eastern European radio program, entirely mundane, the little snippet of it, but it was an amazing little artifact that we found.
Yeah. That I because of Heinbach, I was sort of, you watch his videos and you just instantly go, new tab, eBay, and then Marantz, CP, whatever. And so I sort of was looking into cassette decks, and I would I have, there's such a kind of romanticism about the idea of having one of those nice, 80s, premium 80s radio production broadcast cassette decks.
Oh, yes.
With phantom power.
The Uos or the Marantzes, yeah.
I'd love to have one of those. And the Sony, the little Sony WD6 or whatever, it's like the tiny little thing.
Yeah.
But that kind of has an equivalent audio quality as a big, like a big deck. And so I was sort of looking into these things, and I didn't end up buying a cassette deck. So 120 quid. I'm just like, does my fetishism stretch to 100? But what I did buy was a little dictaphone.
Oh, yes.
Because it uses it with the tiny little cassettes, and under Heinbach's advice, so he was like, it's good because it's so crappy. You just get all of, you cannot divorce the tapiness. It's just wall-to-wall warpiness.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't record at the correct speed. It doesn't play back at consistent speeds. It needs servicing. And so I just recorded a whole series of my niece talking and stuff in the street and conversations. And I've been acquiring samplers and will transfer and do something, with my posh Circlon sequencer and a sampler and this material.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring this up is that I was also buying old cassettes.
Oh, yes.
Old little cassette. I was looking for new ones. I was happy to buy. And people, just like with cassettes, people have got 5 packs and they just chuck them on eBay.
Yeah.
But I got one that was in a pack, and it was sealed in a package.
Yeah.
But it was not blank. It had been used for an answering machine.
Oh,
wow. So it has messages on it from someone in the UK. And it's, like, hello, Sandy, da-da-da-da. And I'm going to have, I haven't done it yet, but I will transfer that off, and that's going straight into my radio music.
So there's an amazing site that is somebody who just does exactly that.
Yes.
He collects those tapes, and he's also made a radio music library.
There's a
yes,
I've got some of those. I've got some of them. Yeah, it was in your set, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, I think that's a wonderful project as a concept. It's like these
conversations. Well, it goes back to what Robin used to do as Scanner when back when you could actually just record phone conversations over the air.
Yeah,
because it was all analog and unencrypted.
I did ask him about it. I was like, "Is that really true?" He's like, "Yes, it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could do it.
You could literally just tune into." And people tuned into the royal family. I mean, that's where some of that stuff came from.
Really?
Yeah. One of the great scandals was it Prince Charles talking to Camilla? There was recordings, which I think was recorded like that. I don't see how else it would have been recorded unless it was kind of leaked by MI5. But it was, it used to just be that you could do that.
Absolute crackers. And you haven't in this year bought the little mini Nagra for the sort of, like you're using the wire, for clandestine recording. That's why it's so small.
Those would be an amazing thing, but no.
I mean, it is like a Swiss. It's that sort of. It's like the Sony.
I mean, the big ones are like a Swiss watch inside. They're incredible, but they're not quite as small. But you've become a great watch fetishist. I've noticed.
I'm always a watch fetishist.
Yeah.
I have been for many years.
Yeah.
Anyone who's watched my videos has noticed the fact that I've always got like different watches.
Yeah.
I had a sort of, I'm a kind of. I'm an idiot in many ways and struggled to like read analog watches and sort of just bought digital watches for years.
Yeah.
And I like digital watches. But this has been my latest obsession, which is the Seiko Giugiaro Seiko, which is designed by Giorgio. Is it Giorgio Giugiaro? But the guy, he designed the DeLorean.
Okay.
And so it looks DeLorean-y. Yeah. But it's famous because it was the watch that James Cameron chose for Sigourney Weaver to wear in Aliens.
I see.
So if you look carefully, she's wearing this.
And is that the one where you bought two of them?
Yes, because...
So you could hack them together.
Yeah, basically, because... I mean, and I respect this, and it's cool that, like, Seiko, when they reissued this watch, which was originally made in the early 80s, they did they didn't quite design the future. They did it a little bit differently. It wasn't exactly the same as the old watch.
Yeah.
And then they did variants that I don't know. I think back in the originals, there was a silver and there was a black one. But yeah, they made a silver one, but they put the black chronograph on the side.
Right.
And then they did a black one and they put a silver chronograph on the side. Just to be like, and then the faces were inversions of each other as well. So you had this kind of, these two models that are like they're perfect opposites of one another. And so I bought both.
So what you're saying is they created a recreation of an older product, but rather than creating a proper recreation, they decided to add clever things to it.
Yes, exactly right.
And you didn't want that.
No, I didn't want that. I just wanted the whole thing as it was. And I can't have it because, unfortunately, the second-hand prices for are just skyrocketing because of the rarity, and there's only 3,000.
Yeah.
So I do accept that. So I mean, Yuli, if you're listening, like.
Uli watches.
Yeah. I just don't think we should give him any more ideas. I think he's got plenty of ideas of his own. The analogy is in comedy. It's like, it's not funny to punch down, but punching up is funny.
Yeah.
Someone else was like, oh, you're a massive fucker because Tip Top, someone Modular Addict did their own, and I'm like, well, that's punching sideways.
Yes.
You're both small companies.
Maybe we should just have less punching.
Yeah, well, that would be ideal. Do your own thing. I mean, like, to their credit, like Hoser, have you seen the Hoser hopscotch? It's the same idea, but it's implemented differently. It has its own benefits as well with the hopscotch, the Hoser hopscotch, because the sort of socket is not connected to the thing. You can do this is really nerdy, but you can do this thing of like laying it down and then create like 5 stacks off of it.
Okay, yeah.
And you would never have a stack cable that high.
No.
But you can have a hopscotch that is that high, and you can lay it sideways so it's not, you can actually use it. Do you know what I mean? So what I was saying at the beginning of about a year ago, last year I felt like I had just not actually finished anything. I think that's what we're talking about. You just, I sort of like berated you to say, just do it. This year I finally put out the Startup, which is the little headphone amp with. I think that's great as well.
And that had been, I showed that at Superbooth like 3-4 years ago. Really, I kept making these annoying little changes to it. So this year, I actually had a new kind of daily routine. My daughter gets up really early to go to school, so I was like, I'll get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I'll do an hour of music thing, probably between 7 and 8, and then I'll go off to work. And that's been brilliant, and I've been able to do that.
Have you done that consistently?
Pretty consistently all year. And it was really good because it meant I was never sat in the evening thinking, I should do some
I'm
thing I want to do, but I'm sort of tired. I don't really want to do that. So I got my evenings back. Yeah, and it meant that I was able to say, I'm going to do this much time, but to whatever, So I didn't also need to be thinking as much about kind of prioritization because I knew I had quite a lot of this chunk of time to do.
Yeah.
So I spent sort of most of January, February, March doing a kind of sequencer project that I would have probably mentioned showed you last year.
Well, yeah.
And it essentially has got away with me. I haven't got away from me. I spent literally about 6 weeks trying to work out ways of generating interesting rhythmic patterns using very, very small amounts of memory, in kind of binary, and buying books like
The Geometry of Musical Rhythm.
Yeah, books like
that sounds like Euclidean. It's got 3 songs.
That is by the Euclidean guy, but then you've got Creating Rhythms by Holos and Holos, and you've got and you'll notice how they're not that heavily used, these books, because some of them are very, very intense. So Rhythm and Transforms by Sethares is apparently the one to go for. But I literally spent about 3 months looking at diagrams like this, where you just have hundreds of little spots and dots and bits of binary. And then I sort of, lost interest a bit and
can't be asked to read this.
I just kind of this is not something I'm enjoying anymore on this one. But so I sort of moved away from that. So I will no doubt come back, and also you learn a lot along the way.
Yeah.
And so, but I ended up sort of looking at it and thinking this is too complicated. It was also partly I was simultaneously trying to design a thing that was useful, but also imagine ways that people would be able to expand from it and use it to do other things. It became too laborious. Where I found things are interesting in the past is where you do something quite quickly and you put it out, and then people do interesting things with it. So microphoning was a classic example of that, where it was basically a joke. Wouldn't it be funny if you could hear the switches and the knobs in your modular? And that became something much more interesting, and Emily took that on to something even more interesting. The Turing machine, when I first designed that, had no real idea of the expanders. So it wasn't really built with those ideas in the future.
Yeah.
I just thought, you might as well surface these. So if I can think of something else, I can do it with that. So I sort of eventually, put that modular to one, so that sequencer to one side. And then spent a lot of time looking at this sort of tiny MIDI thing with a screen and a accelerometer in it, but it's definitely not quite finished, so it doesn't quite work, and will be gone back to. But it was the idea of something that was that would put out MIDI, or put out, you connect it by USB, so it can put out MIDI. I'm sure you could program it to put out OSC or whatever else you want to have coming out of it.
Well, it's got a DAC, and
so it's got a single pot, it's got a few buttons, and it's got an accelerometer, and it's got a screen. So it's really interesting for
that really is a music thing.
Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting things you could do with it, where you have things like particles moving around the screen, and as you move them round,
I saw some
trigger off notes.
Yeah,
some of the prototypes
you had some little
there.
clips that sounded amazing,
and it is really interesting. And again, it's another thing that I will return to. But really interesting as well for just doing really, really teeny. If you look at I'm looking at it has a sort of back panel, but
this needs a strap. And I could wear it.
It's almost like that, and it then sort of did. I learned a lot again about using microcontrollers in different ways and making things that were very small.
So why does it need to be small?
Because it's like a USB stick. It's not, it's like it's nature.
Could it actually be a USB stick so you could plug it into a computer? Or is
I did look at it. You could absolutely have USB coming out of it. I just thought if you then have that and an accelerometer in it, it's a bit like you move your entire laptop around. The earliest designs of it would be a USB stick, but then you realize you just have an extension cable to actually do anything with it. You might as well just have a.
Well, it's like that dude who put a DX7 or whatever into a USB stick.
Yeah.
And then there is that little analog synth that's a USB stick as well.
Yeah, and you get ones in the MIDI sockets as well. So it was kind of thinking about that, but didn't quite get to the answer.
Interesting.
And going from that, so thinking about MIDI and thinking about microcontrollers a lot.
Knobs.
Mark Wiedenbaum, who's the journalist.
This quiet
man. This quiet guy.
Yes.
He was on Facebook saying, who will make, why isn't there a small MIDI controller that's got a couple of knobs and fits in your bag so that when you're at the library, you can just have a quick fiddle with something, play music for a few minutes while you're researching. So this is what I designed for him.
Okay.
Which was literally what is it that you want? So he said, so that's 5 sliders. So it's like a little mini, music easel sequencer there.
Yeah.
2 pots and 2 endless encoders.
Oh, these are endless. Yeah.
So design that for him, and then it's got one USB-C and one USB mini. They're just connected together, so essentially if one falls off you can use the other one, or depending on what you've got. So it did that, and that was quite interesting as a little project. It was quite, because MIDI is so simple and because the code kind of all exists. So I then made these ones.
This is just like 8 sliders.
So this is literally just 8 sliders, very similar to Tom's 16N, which is that thing. It's the same sort of thing. It's just got USB-C. It's got hardware MIDI out there. And then it's got this kind of screen on the back. So this has got LEDs that shine through, so you can choose, and then scribble strips on the back, so you can write, DX7, CC 32 to 39 on the back, whatever. And that does work very nicely. So I think we might.
So this is sort of the MIDI equivalent of this,
exactly,
of the 4 knobs.
So I realised my whole thing has been scale this year. So it's been really, really small things, really big things. This is, slightly smaller than a credit card, but it is really nice just having it plugged into your, obviously I'm just describing a MIDI controller.
Indeed.
It's it's slightly smaller than a credit card, and it's kind of just quite a nice, and they have loads of different.
I suppose I'm kind of thinking, well, what does this offer that no other controller does? And I suppose it's just the utter raw simplicity of it.
Really simple and really small.
It literally is just 8 little faders, but you could do any number of. And does it say SysX?
Flatter one. It can do SysX. It can do. I'm sure it also actually runs Python. So you actually, when you plug it into your laptop, a little folder appears on your desktop. And it's got a bunch of text files in it, and that's the entire code.
Oh, wow.
So it's even simpler than a kind of Arduino type thing. So it's quite.
We talked about this. Did you show me this? Oh, no, you sent me an email about it. I was like, it'll slide around. And so you then bought.
Then you need.
Then you went and bought.
You need a gel mats. So squidgy gel mats.
And you seem to have come to love these things.
These are great. You just literally stick them down, and then nothing slides about. They're perfect.
You actually had one stuck to your monitor as well.
Yeah, you can do this.
Then I was starting to go, right, okay, I can see the...
Like it on there.
For our audio listeners, Tom has just squidged one onto his iMac and then perfect physical controls just where I need them.
Just exactly right in the middle of the screen. It's just perfect.
Wow. It's sort of weird. It kind of is like... So, did it send SysX, and has it got a DX7?
Yes.
Can you program your DX7 with it?
You can program the DX7 with it, and...
When are you doing the one with, the Gellinghouse version that's got 160?
Well, the point is you could do it. It's just, it's quite big.
How much do these little sliders cost?
The sliders are quite expensive.
Yeah.
So the sliders are like at least £1.50.
Okay.
So it's not ultra cheap. Obviously... I'd imagine Uli gets them a bit cheaper.
Well, yeah, I'm sure he does.
She bought 10 million of them.
Yeah, exactly.
They're quite interesting, the different sizes as well. Like this one's got the little kind of...
they're slightly longer throw, aren't they?
No, well, they're...
What do you mean
the ends.
The actual slides. I like these, they remind me of the Odyssey.
Yeah. because they're quite nice for hacking as well.
Yeah.
So you can easily turn it into something like, it can be a sequencer, and each of these can change a numerical something that causes the way it generates notes, that sort of thing. Because it is very easy to program to make it do interesting things.
How much would they cost? How much would this retail for?
I haven't worked that out at all. So there will definitely be other MIDI controllers will be available that are cheaper.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you'll be able to get those kind of Korg ones.
Yeah. I mean, those are crazy cheap.
Next to nothing.
But also they're not hackable or flexible in that way.
Yeah, and I don't know I never know whether people are going to want something.
Your kerning is not tight enough on there. Yeah. I actually made a video recently.
About kerning?
And I was like choosing, I haven't got a font for my video. I need to have my own font. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My aesthetic is sort of not, I don't really have a font, but there are fonts I sort of enjoy and kind of return to.
Yeah.
And there was one I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I was like, I'll close kern it. I was like, oh, that looks lovely, really classy. And then I realised it's your font, and it's because, and it's in the Mimia phone video. If you I was oh wow, I've just actually redesigned the music thing logo. Sorry, Tom, I probably need to pay you a few quid for that. So apologies, I ripped you off.
Well, that came onto the book. So then the other thing I did in my early mornings
made a book.
I mean,
this is the thing. Obviously, you are a journalist. Have been a journalist, so it kind of a book is almost the most. Normal thing I can think that you would make.
But in fact, the idea for this came, partly from these.
This is, by the way, it's called the Music Thing Modular Workshop Notebook. What is the sort of elevator pitch for this book?
So the idea is it's a notebook for designing electronics. Modules specifically. So this thing here is what it was originally based on, which is the Make magazine did a Maker's Notebook, which has, this is one of mine, and literally it's...
You got sort of designs for the Turing machine.
This will have Turing machine designs in it.
It's somewhere. A historical document.
So this has got
FM
radio module.
This will be in a museum one day.
So I use these. Yeah, there we go. See, it's a mini Klee at this stage.
So yeah, it's got the little shift register thing.
This, I think, was before I worked out the actual main sort of knob that changes that locks on unlocks.
Amazing. This is just graph paper.
This is just graph paper.
And so that's...
There you go. That's the first...
Oh, shit.
That's the first sketch where I was like, oh, hang on, that's what it will do.
So there's it's literally a picture of chaos knob loop double loop, which you didn't put on the actual thing, so it's never clear what the turning the knob actually does. And I even now don't remember which side is double and which is single.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I just have to do it and be it starts like that. It could definitely. I mean, I've got
I saw your upside down one.
Yeah, I put one. I put one in my case. So I use it to control the amount of steps of a Euclidean module.
Okay, yeah.
So which is a nice, because then it makes a loopable, and effectively controls the amount of steps in a really pleasing way.
Yeah.
And then I've turned it upside down just so that the sockets aren't in the way. So
so the book was the idea came from my son, who is his kind of hobby thing he's done has been he's into playing cards. Nice. And there's this whole thing of cardistry that sort of teenage boys do. Cardistry, which is collecting and doing kind of tricks and stuff.
Oh,
but not more manipulating the cards rather than magic tricks.
When you do the sort of fanning them and...
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. So him and his mates do kind of events in London and Dynamo turns up and there's quite a sort of little scene around that. But
there are scenes.
There are endless scenes. Things. So he completely off his own. He came up with the idea of making a notebook so people can sketch playing card backs and playing cards. They can design them. So he literally just did this. Wow. He prints like a fanzine sort of thing. So he went to his printer and said,
"How old is your son?"
He's 16.
What was I doing when I was 16?
He was making a profitable fanzine when he was 14. It was just incredible. I've never produced a profitable magazine in 20 years of trying. So he did this notebook, and I was like, hang on, somebody might want that for modules. So you've got basically graph paper for drawing your circuits.
Yeah.
with these kind of spots that match up to components. So they are.
So actually, the spots are. You could lay the components on the paper, and they're the correct
so it's like
distances.
It's like here is a.
So you've got a little
op amp.
And we know about that.
As we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You put it on, and the legs match up with the spots. So it's
amazing.
kind of you're sketching in the right kind of layout.
In the correct dims, and indeed they do.
So it was.
So that's sort of like PCB layout is what you would use.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, you would do PCB, but it's more just, it might be if you're planning something to put on a breadboard, or you're just building something on perf board, which is another of the kind of prototyping things you can do. That can help you just think, and also one of the processes earlier on is just working out, can you fit the components you're thinking about in roughly the right sort of space? So you might sketch it out. Yeah. Potentially in there. But also you need a graph of some kind. You need graph paper.
You need lines.
So you've got that, then you've got a whole mass
I love these. These are like the blank, they're just like blanks on paper.
Just blank panels. So you can then sketch them and you can...
Oh, look.
Yeah, there's one of those little tiny screens.
Oh,
you put the components on and draw around them, and you can just get, what would it be like if you had a little vertical OLED screen in the middle of the page?
That's vertical, just to save HP.
And, chuck a few controls on that. What if you had like a mad, enormous knob on there?
That makes, and you've got different sizes, so you can basically...
Yeah.
And I think, this is, if it was me, that's... you sent me one of these books very kindly, and I mean, I have ideas for modules, quite often where I'm like, there's something I want to do.
Well, just draw them and then send them to me, and then I'll make them.
And then we'll send it to Uli, and then he'll do the
exactly. He'll do the work.
Yeah, cool.
So it was nice, really, and this was just like a nice, simple... I had to buy this book in order to design it, which I remember...
You mean you justified the purchase?
I remember when I was working in magazines, all the designers had this book.
Oof, that is this is Grid Systems in Graphic Design. A visual...
Joseph Müller-Brockmann. And literally...
So everything's in a Helvetica.
It is pure maths, this book. It's hilarious. It's how you... And I remember seeing them, I was like, why do designers make such a fuss about grids the whole time? What are they up to?
Yeah.
And when I actually tried to design this, something that looked remotely sort of sensible and professional, you realise it's like, when you get through it, it's literally pages and pages of this is how you do the maths to arrange columns.
Magazine layout?
It's magazine layout.
That's what
it's to do with the heights of the text. The whole thing connects
line width is something that I'm a big, 80 characters I think is correct line width. There are a few websites that I've where they just don't think about that at all. And it's like, we've all got big monitors and the pages stretch out wide. You can't read text if you don't want to anyway.
But essentially I read that, and you then create a grid.
Did this help?
It did help. It did mean this is designed in a rational manner.
I'm very pleased to hear that.
Absolutely.
Do you mean not like the what is the golden ratio or whatever?
It's that sort of thing. That one isn't the golden ratio, but it's proper, you lay it out and it all kind of works just about.
I mean, surely these are things that you would have approached intuitively. Like, you've got a sense of...
I definitely didn't approach it. No, if you approach it intuitively, it looks like you've designed it intuitively.
Okay, cool.
That book is amazing because it is literally, this explains how the whole thing works. And you sit there with a calculator and you work it all out in design. And then you're like, okay, now I've got columns that do this and columns that do that, and up and down. It all makes it work. It's very Swiss.
And on these pages as well, you've used your random module generators to create ideas in case you're stuck. The Cumbia Mix is a massive pitch shifter module that is handmade in the Cotswolds. Russell Haswell connected history glass for laser. I'm sure he did. And the results were challenging.
As ever.
Yes. Well, why not?
And there's a nice ad at the back for funk.
Yes, and then there's a sort of 80s synth ad.
So that's literally a Oberheim ad. There is an Oberheim ad.
Yeah, that is just that layout.
And we just copied it.
Yeah, I designed an ad recently, and I just, if you buy Sound on Sound, there is an ad for this brand called Loki.
Right.
Which Loki is, they're like these little, laser cut sort of wood veneer stands.
Yes,
and they're sort of they have their own little grid system.
Yeah.
They're kind of, grid system, but they interlock and you can expand them.
Yeah.
I think they're really good. But I designed an ad to put in Sound on Sound, which I did all the writing for as well.
Yeah.
And it's just the Ogilvy ad.
Yeah.
The Ogilvy format.
So it's got a long copy.
It's long form copy.
Brilliant.
It's a big appealing picture. It's a real picture. It's not a drawing or a render. You know, it's so funny how when you read that, there is this piece of A4 paper that is, you know, this is everything that we've learned about ad design from Ogilvy. Here you go. It's on a plate. Yeah. And it talks about, you know, long form copy, and there is a whole sort of, you know, everyone thinks. The best example of this, which is, again, it was Ogilvy's comment where they say, you know, people want a punchy headline. They don't want to, you know, and they do want a punchy headline. You have to have a headline that draws you in. But it's this idea that people don't read long copy. Yeah. You know, and it's like, and the argument is that if you're trying to sell someone on something, if you're a salesperson, you know, do you just go, will you, when you stand at, you know, Synthfest, will you go...
Big knobs.
Big knobs now.
Yes, I will.
Will you just say those words and then just freeze and the person will just throw money at you?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Or will you
that's definitely what I'm planning.
Okay, cool. That will certainly do something.
Expensive knobs, slightly less expensive knobs. Yeah.
And just say that, and that's all you say. I think, great.
But that long comment, there's an amazing article about designing, about how you sell things on websites. And it talks about, their example is the Kindle page on Amazon. Yeah. So Kindle is an enormously important product for Amazon. The Kindle page has got something like 4,000 words of copy on it. Because they will obviously have optimized it endlessly and endlessly and endlessly. And they've discovered that if it's constructed clearly, so you can navigate through and you can say, okay, what's my question? What's my answer? How does it work? That is the correct amount of copy.
4,000.
It's something like, it's 2,000 or 4,000.
That was the amount that convinced you people.
And it's a really, really, really long page, even without the comments at the bottom. It's a really long scroll down.
I mean, imagine that someone shopping for a book reader would be interested in reading copy.
You can imagine.
I mean, there is some, I can see the logic that they went with there. But it's interesting it's that much. And this is the point. I mean, if you're trying to sell people on the big knob machine, you spend 10 minutes listening to them explain, you know, what are your problems? What are you trying to do?
What are the problems that will be solved by a larger knob?
Absolutely right. And in your daily work, you were talking about your job. You know, your job is to go in and listen at length.
It's listening to customers and understanding what are their actual needs. Yeah. Which, again, takes us back to Uli. Yeah. Uli says, what is it that you want? I'd like an 808. And then Roland's going, maybe you'd like a small digital 808 with green fluorescent knobs or something. And he goes, here is an 808.
I wonder if they do market research, you know. Who? I know Roland and Behringer as well. I know Behringer's market research is Uli posts on Gear Sluts and says, whatever you want, we'll make it. Yeah. Which is cool, but it is that idea of, you know, as I said, the quote earlier is, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Exactly, a cheaper 808. Yeah. And obviously it's not going to make any progress in the world, but if you're trying to flog drum machines, it might be a better approach than trying to imagine what they want.
But it's then you've got Electron, who designed the analog rhythm, and you have something that is genuinely new, but has the... It makes me sad.
So when you're designing modules at home,
yes,
what is it that you're designing?
I have needs. Yeah, I've got needs. I have needs, and I'll be like, you know, one of them that I've mentioned before, and which is wonderful because if I mention these things, people email me them, and I'm creating that thing, or it's something that I was interested in making as well, and I happen to have designed it. Yeah, you know, and some people very kindly have sent me their things, but like for example, I wanted a way of having two sequences and then just going from 2 to 1. Right. Not 1 to 2, but so I want the inputs of two sequences and I want to be able to choose which one I'm listening to at that point, or which I'm sending into a voice. And so and that's something that hasn't quite existed. The other one, what was the other? I can't remember. It'll come to me.
Because you don't want Uli to copy it.
I don't want Uli to copy it, or Music Thing to come out with a version of it before I can.
Exactly. Is it the bigger knob?
It is. It's like even bigger knob.
Just with one.
It's like a wheel. It's like a big steering wheel.
Actually, speaking of wheels.
Oh my god!
I've got to make something of this. This I bought off.
Is that a Vernier dial?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not. It's actually an encoder, and it's for milling machines. Like, I guess there's kind of, milling machines. But have a go on that.
Oh, that's nice.
Very pleasing, isn't it?
So is that's just... it reminds me a bit of that and this is something that Jason at Signal Sounds was talking about. There's a cassette transport module.
Oh yes, yeah,
which uses a similar dial, but it will obviously be a smooth.
Yeah, that's smooth. 'Cause I was going to say,
this will probably now be mono. But
are you doing a quad?
This is going to be quadrophonic.
Not 5.1.
No, I'm going to do it like I'm going to do it like Dolby Atmos. This podcast, since I've recorded it in a tetrahedral array.
So you're going to hire some enormous cinema to play it.
Absolutely right. That is the way that this podcast was meant to be enjoyed. If you're watching on your phone, you're fucking cheating yourself like it's a joke.
But literally, that is the module design process. You see something
that's wonderful.
And I'm like,
what can I attach to it? Well, I think you need the quicker that you invent a DX7 controller that is just done.
Well, maybe if you did that, but with 180 of these, it was great.
Oh my god!
You just go
like the size of a wall. Yeah, millions of pounds to buy.
They're really heavy as well. So somebody shared a bunch of videos of some Dutch TV show where they went to Square Pusher's house, Votek's house.
Yes, I love that.
And who's the other one? Oh, there's 3 people.
It's like the old drum and bass.
The drum and bass, and but I always remember hearing those drum and bass records that had so much just stuff going on in them. You just thought, is somebody actually sat here and put all this stuff in place? Moved all these tiny little bits together to make this incredibly precise thing.
Absolutely.
And it was like a watch or something. It was this incredibly precise thing that they would do. And in that video, you see them being slightly more relaxed about it. It's like, chuck some notes in here, they put it out, and it's like, oh, you've made a Photec record. That's amazing.
I mean, but then if you see what Square Pusher is using to make that music, I'm like, where's the sequencer? And I believe this is true. The sequencer is a Boss drum machine.
Right, yeah.
And he's just got a 950, an 8-track reel-to-reel and a Mackie desk, and his bass guitar and some records that he sampled. I'm like, that's
the wonderful one when he then goes to some rave. And
and he plays
kind of a soundtrack. And he's like, it's a bit smaller than I was expecting.
Yeah, this is my first. I've never played a festival before.
He's just I think he still kind of makes music in that way. I think he. Yeah. I read an interview with him where he fundamentally says that he hasn't changed how he makes music from that day. From the way that he worked, that he just uses a computer as a sort of big tape machine.
Yeah.
And he is another one that can keep the bigger picture in his mind.
Yeah. After watching that, I wonder what Photec's up to now.
Yeah.
Very big Hollywood, LA type producer.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was extraordinary to shift from him. Because in the film, he also has a Ferrari at that stage. So he drives, at the beginning of the film, he drives his Ferrari into this tiny suburban house somewhere.
In like
He goes into his kind of shed and makes this thing. But then you Google him again, and he's now in LA, and this enormous switch, and he looks almost unrecognisable.
Yeah, that's quite weird.
Yeah,
and that's the sort of. Whereas I think Square Pusher has a nicer house, but fundamentally still lives in lives in Essex and does the same thing.
So the Hollywood thing, right? Another thing I did this year, I have a friend who is a soundtrack composer. So Daniel Pemberton.
Yes.
And I mentioned before when you go and see him recording. I don't know if I mentioned the previous one. So this year he was he's just done the Motherless Brooklyn soundtrack, which is really nice and it's kind of jazzy, really interesting. But he also did he did the Danny Boyle Beatles film this year.
Right, yes.
And so he was recording this at Abbey Road, as you would. So I went round to see him while he was doing this, and it's amazing to
go Abbey Road.
At Abbey Road.
Yeah.
I just find it so amazing watching how he works. So you go in and you've got the control room at Abbey Road, obviously, and I think he was doing brass when I was in there. So in the room are 6 absolute super pro session brass players, and he sits there with an enormous stack of kind of ring binders with the score in it, and he's got a guy doing the kind of tape operators and the kind of engineers. He's got a guy operating the film, because you have the film as cut and it will be, they're doing it to the picture.
Wow.
And sometimes on previous ones, I've seen he actually will have the director of the film there as well with him. He wasn't there when I went in. But he'll turn the page and it will say, Q 96. And he'll go, maybe he'll have some instructions for the players, but he'll be like, go and do it. And they go, and the thing comes out and it sounds perfect, extraordinary. And he'll go, oh, yes, just a little bit more in the second half. And you, number third trombone, just a little bit, bit quieter on the second bar there. And then they play it again. He goes, great. Score 97, 98. And he moves on. It is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in terms of this kind of the professionalism of every single person involved. I saw him doing a guitar recording for something as well, where it was 4 or 5 guitarists playing like weird sort of like Mexican little guitars or acoustic guitars or whatever, and this incredibly complicated stuff they were doing, and literally open the page, play it perfectly,
move on.
This amazing hearing of somehow detecting these little things, and then this vast thing all then gets knitted together into this soundtrack afterwards. It's just an amazing thing to see being done, and so different from any other kind of work I've ever seen. Operating. I've operated in. It's not like national newspaper newsrooms is the place I work where you sort of get, but it's nowhere near that level of just everyone in the room is complete professional in literally an environment built for doing that.
Yeah.
But then the other great thing, because it's Abbey Road, they finish, and you wander into the studio. You must have been to Abbey Road, and you wander
been to Abbey Road, yeah.
And
not into the Beatles studios.
Well, we went in. You've got the piano that was it Eleanor Rigby? What was it? The famous piano that it's all done on,
there.
With all the literally just in the corner you can just play it and it sounds mad. Just everything about it.
It is.
It's still there, just as it ever was, and just is constantly in use.
Yeah.
You've got 3 studios with amazing things happening in all of them.
I don't know how you learn to do that. I suppose if you're an incredible musician and you've got the ear, and it's just a case of applying it.
I guess the process is the thing that I found really impressive. But I imagine you learn that relatively quickly. It's just having the skill to actually
and to hear what right is. But I suppose if you wrote it, then
and then imagining it's also. I mean, it's amazing how it's all done, properly. I always imagine film soundtrack composers would all be like sample banks and do that. And
I think many of them are at certain budgets.
Here's the level where everything seems to be recorded, properly, with the most extraordinary session musicians and orchestras and whoever. So.
I think it's that thing. Who was I talking to? Sort of talking about the fact that a lot of what some, and I'm sure not Daniel, but like there are other people who are basically writing orchestral music but aren't really orchestral arrangers. End up writing very reductive, simple things for musicians to play. It's sort of not. There is so much art and kind of beauty and complexity in true quote unquote, whatever that means, classical recording that perhaps we're losing because none of it, or few of us, are classically trained and have those skills. The
other thing actually was particularly with the brass stuff, was how it was almost a athletic performance as well. So this was recording bits of the end of. They were doing Hey Jude, and at the end of the film, they do this like ludicrously overblown version of Hey Jude as part of the plot of the thing. So he was saying to these brass players like it just needs to be, you're at 12 now, it needs to be about 15. And the sort of brass players are kind of going, okay, well what we'll do is let's do that chunk at the very end, and then we'll do these bits here, and because you can't play brass instruments at full pelt for very long.
Okay.
And this just extraordinary, this kind of constructing the evening so that people will be able to play at the right moment and the right point. Just this levels of kind of expertise and complexity, and you imagine a process that will have evolved over 100 years of how you record and how they work, and I'm sure there's almost like union stuff in there as well. They'll be like, we do it at this point. It's like those fantastic stories of Herbie Flowers. You know who Herbie Flowers is? So he is the British session bass player who played, amongst other things, on Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed.
Right.
And he, on those kind of classic albums shows, he often pops up. Walk on the Wild Side story is that he played this bass line, and then he said, what I could do is overdub. I've got this other idea I could overdub over the top of it. if you overdub something, you get paid twice.
Amazing.
So my day job, one of the interesting things in my day job is one of our clients is the National Grid.
Right.
And so one of the things I did this year was I went to visit the interconnector, which is the cable that runs between the UK and France at something like 325,000 volts, whatever. We buy electricity from France. France buys electricity from us. Different times it's passed between the two.
Oh, wow.
There's actually, I think, 8 cables that run under the sea. One of the things I saw there was this thing about the size of a football field, maybe, which they explained to me was essentially a low-pass filter. So a low-pass filter in your synthesizer or whatever is essentially a resistor, a capacitor, and in more old-fashioned ones, an inductor, which is like a coil of wire.
Yeah.
They were doing exactly this, but the resistors were the size of grand piano. The capacitors were the size of this shed, pretty much. And the inductors were about the same size, and they're on like towers up. And the filter was to filter off harmonics. But just absolutely
the scale of
the thing, and the physicality of it, of the kind we saw some while we were there. Some people were on one of those crane lift things, changing resistor because somebody had been walking around the site and they had heard a noise from the box that the resistor was in, and they were like, "Oh, there's something's a bit up with that resistor." And the whole site as well had that. The hum of like arc, kind of arcing, kind of almost like lightning, yeah, that sort of sound. So that was a quite interesting sense of just the different scale of what would literally be smaller than a fingernail if you're doing it at 12 volts with 0 amps, which is what we're doing. They're doing it vast amperages and at
what would happen? I mean,
volts.
If you even got near, do you know what I mean? If you came into contact with 750,000 volts,
I think vaporize, I'd imagine.
Like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Just like, that is wild. But of course, I didn't even know that we shared power with.
Yeah, no, well, and the other thing is it has to go. So obviously our power is oscillating like that. It's at 50 hertz. France is oscillating, but out of sync. Because the other by
itself is just a great sentence. France is
oscillating. The other amazing thing I learned doing this stuff with National Grid is that the whole nation is as has been obvious over the last week, perfectly synchronized.
Yes.
So the plugs here are doing 50 hertz. The plugs in Edinburgh are doing exactly the same 50 hertz.
At exactly the same.
The same cycle. Literally, when that plug is up, the plug in Edinburgh is up.
Really?
Because they're all connected to generators and turbines, and the turbines are also synchronized. So in a power station in Wales and a power station in Edinburgh, the things are spinning at the same.
Why do they need to be synchronized?
Because otherwise you need the mechanism to move their phase and synchronize them, because they can't be on the same circuit and out of phase.
Okay.
Because you can imagine. That would be bad. That would suddenly mean it was going up to twice the voltage or whatever it was.
Right, okay.
So one of the things they have, the other thing they have there is they have a thing that converts 750,000 volts AC to 300,000 volts DC that goes under the sea as DC and then comes back. And
DC.
The room that did that was another extraordinary, massive, weird room of that was actually very high tech. The stuff outside looks like sort of 1950s era. It's modern and being fixed, but it doesn't look. The room that did that was full of this extraordinary kind of solid state stuff, synchronized to computers, and it was a strange experience. And you look into it, and you couldn't tell the scale of the objects at all inside it. When you look through this window, if you take a picture of it, you literally don't know if it's a circuit board or it's a warehouse size place, because the whole thing was so alien to look at. So, the National Grid is an remarkable, extraordinary object that is there. They were talking about swapping transformers, and the transformers cost something like £15 million. And they build them in the car park and then install them into the thing, and then they're just... the whole scale of the thing is mind-boggling.
Also, the fact that the national grid never stops. You can't stop it to do maintenance or something like a website.
No.
That to me is crackers. And I love the ebb and flow based on the requirements of the day. Yeah. It's the sort of human, after in an ad break. Yeah. Well, back in the day when we did we all watched the same thing. Power would spike at the ad break because people would put the kettle on.
Absolutely. There was in Russia, they had a TV talent show in the 70s and 80s where voting was done by turning your switch off. And then they checked on the national grid the pulses and
to
see which one had done well.
Why not?
Before telephones were possible and before anything else, they were just like, why not?
That. They didn't have it as turning the TV off. That would be
no. Yeah. And obviously the Russian national grid did have some challenges with Chernobyl and stuff.
That little chestnut. God. Yeah, no, I don't have questions for you. I'm trying to think. I suppose there is sort of the one thing is thinking about the sort of the decade.
Yes.
Which is a scary and odd thing to think about. For myself, if you think, what did I do, in 10 years? And music thing didn't exist 10 years ago.
No, 10 years ago I was doing, I think I just bought an Arduino and was doing little sort of Arduino connecting things together.
Piano player type thing? Or
no, much before then. Yeah. It was, it was like, before I had any real idea of using it for music.
And I suppose you didn't have, obviously music thing didn't exist. In 2008 and 9, that sort of 10, that's, am I right in thinking that is the sort of rise of make noise kind of time?
I think it must be, yeah. I think
sort of, you had Harvestman, Tip Top, and obviously Dupfer, and a few other brands just kind of, that was the sort of burgeoning, it was the 10s basically when it began.
Yeah. So another of the people who was at CV Freaks last week was Andre, who does ADAC systems, and he.
Is it ADAC?
I don't know if
it's
ADAC.
ADAC.
I don't know if it's ADAC or ADAC. Maybe it's ADAC. I don't think we managed. I think we managed to do it without.
Well, that's very frustrating.
Maybe I said it and he said it, and I didn't notice how he pronounced it.
Moog and Moog.
Either way, but he started in I think about 2009, and I remember when the first Eurorack thing I ever went to was Post Modular did an event in Vauxhall that was about 2011, I think, probably. And I remember seeing there one of his things that was I think possibly his marble physics one was there. And you're like, what on earth is that? Oh, that seemed so incomprehensible. And he had his Wii nunchuck controller connector. And you just thought, this is it seemed like such an extraordinary thing, the idea of something that, why would somebody think of doing that? It was so fascinating.
Well, and I think ADAC are kind of uncredited as being one of the most innovative manufacturers. If you actually look at their modules, they're amazing. They are amazing. They are crackers. No one else makes things quite like they do.
And some really like that thing, the thing the Crossfader did recently, I thought was really smart and interesting. I think it's just got
DC transitions. I've got one. And so it's
really interesting.
It's a crossfader and then there's two sets of voltages.
Yeah.
So it's similar, it lives in the same world.
It's the same sort of world as that, exactly.
But it's not the same.
No.
Yeah. It's like a DJ style cross.
Exactly,
But with voltages.
Really interesting. And his past, which is what he was talking about, was he was, for the sort of decade, I guess, before that, or maybe 5 years before that, he was building kind of art installations of things. So he had this amazing one that he said was during the Gulf War, where he took over this enormous gallery. I think this was in Portugal. And he essentially had a perspex wall down one side full of balloons. And he had a robotic paintball gun.
Right.
And a system with fans and electrically powered fans. So every so often it would blow a balloon out of this space where they're all stashed up. It would float across. It would be shot by the paintball gun. And he described how over time the whole gallery filled up, the whole back wall was covered in this kind of dripping paintball goop.
Yeah.
And burst rubber balloons everywhere. And the whole thing just filled up with this umshka.
And so it's supposed to be like, the horror
of
war.
There was definitely some element of the kind of critique of what was happening.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of just really interesting. He did a fantastic. There's a Pong game where you go up and you have like a Pong machine with a TV screen on it, and you start playing with it. And you realise it's a little bit odd. The kind of physics are a bit odd, and then you walk around a wall. And the entire thing is being played with physically, and you're actually looking at a camera pointing down at it, and it's got little blowers, so it's all done with wind. So it's a ping pong ball, I think, and it's just you're blowing things up. It was amazing. So he did all this fantastic, just really interesting, really quirky stuff.
Yeah.
Before he got into doing what he's doing, and then everyone has that story of he saw Eurorack somewhere and was just, I want this, but I can't really afford it. And he had mates in the same situation. So he worked out, how can we make this in a way that's affordable, which is the story that goes all the way back. Surge was exactly that in California in the 60s, was how do I make the people synthesizer that's cheap? He couldn't afford what Moog was doing. Probably couldn't afford what Buchler was doing. He was like, how do we make this cheap and affordable and use the cheapest, at the time, the cheapest possible components, which was the test gear and the simple, pots and stuff. And you had the other people we had were Bastel at CV Freaks, which was exactly the same story. It was the kind of community in Czech Republic where he was just like, I'm going to learn how to make these. And he also had an art school background, and then his mates wanted them and his mates could help, and you suddenly have a kind of collective of 20 people. They have their own coffee brand now.
Of course they do.
He was like, we need coffee, and his mates were like, I can get us
I'll roast
coffee.
it.
I'll roast it, I guess. And then they now have,
Bastel coffee.
They've incubated the coffee brand, essentially.
I think Bastel are the only brand that I've ever seen horizontally and vertically squash and compress or extend text, but in a way that looks cool.
Yeah.
They're the only ones who are allowed to do that.
Yes.
Normally it's an absolute crime.
Yeah, Brockman wouldn't like that.
No, I know Brockman wouldn't. I suppose if you think then ahead to where are we going to be in 10 years' time, other than with older children?
10 years' time.
I guess we'll have more cool things, and I guess, as you say, there will be more cheap things. My only fear is, does that make it a sustainable business for a lot of these innovators that have created the format that we love, And it's...
But if you look historically, that is the way it goes. Well, I suppose it's not true. There have definitely been periods where a lot of people who we now love went bust. So certainly the 80s, when
Moog,
Dave Smith and Moog and all those people went bust because essentially Yamaha, and digital,
because the X7.
But then it wasn't the cheapness; it was that it was much more useful and sounded better. For any of those musicians, and they did all go bust for a long time, and they then came back. But I think if you look at, I do keep coming back to guitar pedals, where you have these very parallel, in guitar pedals you have the cheap stuff and you have boutiques. And those boutiques seem to have been running for kind of 15, 20 years now, and I don't see that they are disappearing. I'm not that close to that industry, but they seem to still be.
Certainly Roland never went out of business. People didn't stop buying Boss pedals because Behringer do cheap clones of them.
No, but equally the boutique companies in the US and elsewhere who are hand making stuff, hand painting stuff, putting stuff together, and often coming up with really interesting, weird, different ideas, because it's not all fuzz boxes in guitar pedal world. They are able to sell £350 pedals, often in the same store that sells £30 pedals. So that world works. Of the many people making Eurorack modules, I would imagine an awful lot of them are not making money, not least because it's not their main job. And in some ways, they are competing as well. So there's a difference between trying to run a business and employ, the way someone like Make Noise will employ a bunch of people and I imagine pays their healthcare and looks after them and has significant costs. And there's a real building and all of that stuff. And somebody saying, I'm going to send off to China for a few boards and I'm going to sit them together in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And I am sort of better than them because I'm able to sell them cheaper. And you're like, well, obviously you're able to sell them cheaper.
On that front, I had an email from Tony Rolando at Make Noise because I discovered a talk by Tom Erb about designing the Erb verb, which ironically had really reverby sounds. So it's like the delicious. But he was wearing a lapel mic, but it sounded horrific. Yeah. And so I downloaded it and fixed it and have re-uploaded it. And actually they're letting me release it. So it will be, it will have been out when
you removed the reverb.
In fairness, no. You can remove reverb to a certain extent with RX, but I fixed the lapel mic because the lapel was hard panned left.
Oh, okay.
And was very low. There was quite a high sort of signal to noise.
Okay.
Noise to signal. And so I just denoised that. Yeah. Isotope RX, which is, maybe that's something that's come out in the last 10 years, is a work of voodoo and art. Like, it is incredible.
That and... what's the other one? The audio pitch Melodyne and that stuff.
Melodyne. I remember I read that music thing where it's like, the magic has finally happened.
I was like, this feels like something that is actually fundamentally against the laws of physics. And I remember at the time, it did feel like you couldn't really see how you would be able to separate out polyphonic sounds.
I suppose spectral editing is, and that's and it was interesting to me to learn that Isotope RX has a spectral view, and you can kind of see the sound when you can paint out the things you don't want.
Yeah,
but that is actually licensed to Cedar, who are relatively unknown, but Cedar make a very high end professional denoising. Algorithms and systems and bits of hardware, and used by the BBC. They'll have one of the equivalent sound devices, and then one of those, and you can. It is astonishing. I will use RX on this to denoise it, but the point was that at the end of Tom's talk, which is fascinating because he talks about the design of algorithmic reverb and people like Michael Gerson who developed ambisonics. Yeah. We are currently recording this with an ambisonic microphone, and it's fascinating. Like, the whole thing of algorithmic reverb is a real dark art, and it's there's Sean Costello from Valhalla DSP, which I've linked to on that video. If you watch it, Sean has done another hour talk about and it really is fascinating because it's making something that is realistic, but not. It's like an impressionistic reimagining of what actual...
It's the psychological effect of the reverb. But I always...
The feel is what Costello talks about. Does it feel right to me?
And it was very interesting when the convolution reverb came along. That is actually what it would sound like.
Yeah.
Often not nearly
it's not good enough.
It's just not quite right.
For example, I used this very microphone. I was like, I need to do some tests with the NTSF-1. So I was like, I went and recorded a choir. It's in like Massam Church. Massam is this little beautiful rural town near where I live, and so I recorded with one microphone this Christmas choir performance, and it is amazing. Like, using the little plug-in you can spread and stuff. Yeah. But what I was particularly interested was rotating the mic backwards so I could hear the reflection. I want to hear what does the report from the back of the church coming back into the microphone sound like. Yeah. And it's not nearly as reverby as you want it. It's only a relatively short tail. It's only it's maybe 2 seconds or something, or a second.
So why is it that when you're there, it feels so...
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's, there is you are obviously hearing sound from a completely 360-degree perspective. When you're listening to a choir, you're hearing some of the direct sound, you're hearing side or top, back reflections, all arriving in your ears at different times. And what was amazing was when you have the plug-in, so like the Rode plug-in, you can sort of create little directed sounds, and so you can point at something like a piano and then have a duplicate, and you can build a sort of stereo image out of it.
And can you automate that? Can you?
Yes.
It's like a VST or something.
Yes. So you can move it and point it at different times.
Yeah.
But then what you can simply do is create a very wide stereo image.
Yes.
So it's using almost all the sides and the stuff. Yeah. And that does create that intense sort of enveloping kind of, surround, which is wonderful. But
it does remind me of that. Another thing that has really become more prominent in the last year is that ASMR stuff.
Yeah.
That as a trend, I can't say I've been participating in it or listening to it much.
I actively hate the sound of amplified whispering.
It is a really extraordinary and very real thing. That if you had said, if we had said 2 years ago, oh, one of the big, YouTube trends will be close mic'd people talking,
I would have said, I believe you. because the internet is a weird ass place. So absolutely right. But no, exactly, yeah. And it has, for some people, a physiological response.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is interesting because it's a physiological response which has only now been able to be activated via technology that was needed to activate. I mean, I don't know if they get the same thing if you go into their actual ears.
It's a bit like the singing. There's that whole history of how recording technology has changed music, which one of the biggest examples of it is the crooners, where it used to be as a singer you had to project, you had to fill a room.
Yes.
And they would record someone like an Italian singer who was the greatest kind of hit of this the 78 era. And then because he could project and it came out of the horn sounding really rich. Yeah. But then when electrical recording was invented, you could get right up to the microphone. You could talk very close, and you could almost whisper into the microphone. And this whole new era of people emerged from that. It was up to Frank Sinatra, but it was people before him, where it was just a completely impossibly different.
And I think we then have is it Billie Eilish? That's her name.
Yeah,
but her productions are quite. I feel like they're post ASMR productions. I was talking to Adrian Utley, name drop. But he was talking about. He's like, he thinks it sounds freaking great, and it does sound incredible, of course. And there's some amazing songs, but it's the way in which they are done. Feels like she is fully exploiting the close miking thing, which is obviously it's been around for 70 years. Because it's never quite sounded like this or been this pronounced.
Well, I wrote a piece. Must have been. I think it was 10 years ago I wrote it. I think it was certainly 2009, I think I wrote it. It was called Why Do All Records Sound the Same?
Yes.
And it was for Word magazine, which was very, very many years ago. But one of the things talked about in that is that thing of just how peculiar close miking is, and talking about a record like Johnny Cash, those recordings with Rick Rubin, where it's like you are literally squatting on Johnny Cash's lap with your ear in his mouth as he croaks out, and it sounds incredible and is an extraordinary thing, but is a million miles away from the experience of being in a room when the band is playing. And one of the questions that I never got a really clear answer to that was why it is that you can, if you hear a band playing live, like say you walk past a pub, you can always tell
that it's a live
band. And I don't know what the signal is. I don't know what it is that you're hearing that's different.
I have actually wondered about that, because I've recognised that too. Like, that's live music. I think it's to do. My pet theory is it's to do with compression and production.
Yeah.
It's that live music is inherently not compressed and mastered often. I mean, obviously sometimes they do have a kind of mastering chain that is being applied, but there is a sort of dynamism to live music.
Do you think if you walk past like the O2, where you've got a really, really professional band going through essentially a studio desk, I wonder if that actually does sound like live music. I wonder if you have the same effect. I wonder if you're wandering around the edge of the OT and you can't see what's on the band on stage. I wonder whether you can tell whether it's a live band or not because it's so produced.
I think you probably.
But it's a very pronounced thing. It's a very.
I would say also there's, for a degree, there's an element of sparseness to live music because people are not able to, when. I've been in this situation, where I've come to play with a band. Yeah. And we're doing a version of something that was originally done on Pro Tools. So there's all of these bells and whistles that you just don't include in the live version, or you reinterpret. And so therefore it's simplified.
But I would say it was true of even very acoustic. I would imagine a recording of a folk band playing and a folk band playing you would be able to tell the difference. But I don't know. I've never studied it or tried to work it out.
It's just to do with the degree of production and the sort of the compressed.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, basically, the end of that Verb talk.
Oh, yes.
Tom actually tells you how much it costs to make an Verb and how much profit that they make. And he basically, he rattles off a few things. And I sent it to Make Noise. I was like, I'm putting this up just so you know. And are you okay with Tom saying this? Even in the video, hilariously, he does say, like, please don't tell Tony that I said this. It's on record. And I've sent it to Tony, and Tony's totally fine with it. He's like, don't worry. It's like, we don't need to hide our... No one should be in surprise that we have to make money. That's literally what we exist to do. But he said the numbers... It was interesting. He says his numbers are not accurate, but I don't think it's any reason not to publish. He says, for example, his costing on the parts is close. And I think this is an important point, because I think when people think about the costs of things, it's very hard for people to go beyond what they see with their eyes.
Exactly.
They cannot see the other things. And what Tony says, he goes, but he does not account for the front-end cost of R&D, per unit cost for labour and for assembly and for quality control, the operations costs for technical support, warehousing, shipping of parts, employee healthcare, benefits packages, rent, utilities, and most importantly, what we pay Tom for his work coding the DSP. And I like, he says, the cost of Tom is extremely significant, but well worth it.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, oh, actually, I forgot to add education, making manuals, making YouTube tutorials, and marketing, social media, YouTube, trade shows, synth events, ads, which someone just goes, it only costs you £15. Why are you charging me £100?
I mean, it's the same with books. It's really transparent in books, because you can go online to an online book publisher and you can see how much it costs to produce these, which is like about £3 or £4 a copy for the printing.
Yes.
So if you send somebody a PDF and £3 or £4, they will give you a book. Obviously there's a little barrier to scale, but it's not actually very high because they're all digitally printed. But it would, if I was actually charging any kind of a day rate for doing these, it would take a very, very long time to pay that back. And then you've got to pay Thonk to have it in their warehouse, to put up the money to print them, to put them in boxes, to send them out. And, people like, I think Steve was having this challenge of, if you order parts from Mouser from the US, they will, if you spend more than 50 quid, they'll ship you to them for free. And it is an amazing service. And, they also cover the tax and the whole thing. So you buy your 200 quid's worth of parts and it arrives and the tax is covered and it arrives in about 3 days. And people will go to Steve and say, well, why can't you do that? And the point is, they are a vast multi-million pound company that will negotiate with USPS, and they will have an enormous deal with them. And also, they may absolutely hate your order. Your £200 order may be absolutely useless for them, and essentially are doing it as marketing. So if you happen to end up working in a big company and you're ordering 10,000 quid a time, then it's worth their while doing
getting you on board. Yeah,
but it's very difficult for and it's one of the reasons you see businesses fail is because it is very difficult for people to understand the costs of things. They will feel like. The other side of it is when people start saying, oh, I need to do this properly. So they look at a business and say, well, to do this business, I need to pay myself this much. I need to have this much facilities and this much and this much. And it obviously ends up not making them any money at all because it's a difficult thing to be in.
Yeah.
But the idea that you look at it and say, well, this has got, on here, there's like, I don't know, a quid's worth of components, if that. These are really cheap basic components. And even these boards themselves are not very much. It's the physical stuff, but then all of that.
It's also
all of that stuff around
the Tom.
Yeah.
Well, there is a Tom in here as well.
There's always Toms in all of this stuff.
But I get the sense that you don't really pay yourself very much for the... Like,
no, I now actually, it's a very incredibly lucrative hobby.
Oh, good.
So I do get paid royalties by Steve, and we do sell a decent amount of stuff. So
it is a second job.
If I was trying to live off it and do it as I do it now, obviously I'd only be doing an hour a day, but it wouldn't be a terribly good living. It would be. You
would be taking a serious pay
cut. Certainly taking a serious pay cut, but equally,
would you be able to pay a mortgage?
You probably would, but I'm in quite an unusual position because I have that structure and the way that's arranged, and also because the vast amounts of work that Steve does and that Thunk does, and the enormous reputation that he has, that I get a little bit of that kind of help along the way. But certainly, in terms of trying to make it as a business, as a career, it's a very difficult, to see how you would do that. And you look at someone like Paul Schreiber at Synthetech, who I believe kind of retired after a long career where this was his sort of side project, and is now doing it full time, but in his retirement. And I imagine, and he's become a lot more productive since that happened, and is producing a lot of beautiful and expensive things that I imagine sell pretty well. But it's not, if your entire marketplace is 10,000 people, or even 50,000, and that, again, coming back to Behringer again, if Behringer can get vast numbers of cases into people's hands, and if they reduce the price of modules by half but double or triple the audience, maybe we will all be selling modules for 100 quid and making a profit on it because we're selling 3 times as many. I mean, it's not inconceivable that could work. And I imagine I've never actually modeled out those costs in that way, but maybe the thing does just become a much larger market and people are able to, because if suddenly you started selling 3 times as much of everything, it would significantly change the economics of it. But not that much. It's interesting. Like with this thing, with the this control module, I showed it to Steve. He's like, "Great, we'll order some. We'll order 250 of them." I was like, "It's a bit of a weird module. I don't know.
Do you think that's too many?"
Well, I said, "I don't know if I feel like people will look at it and either they will go, yes, that's great. I definitely want one of those. I understand it." Or go, "What on earth is that?" It's like it's a or they'll say, "Can you do a 4HP version?" And you're like, "Yes, you could," but
that's literally not what this exists for.
So it is a peculiar. So I was like, "Well, let's look at the numbers and see." And I think we'll probably do like 100 or 125 of them when we do them first, and just see if anyone does want to. And it's a sort of coincidence of the costs for that. There's not that many economies of scale because essentially these, for various reasons, like the pots are a reasonably fixed price. So buying 500 or buying 200,
that's not where you get quantity breaks.
Or it would be, sometimes it makes a big difference. This it doesn't. But equally, that does obviously cut the potential revenue in half. We actually will make drastically less money. I just don't want to risk putting something out that you have a big stack of them filling up the warehouse. And so it's interesting to to start thinking it through in that way. Try and work out, will something be a success? And if you were doing this on a larger scale, where you're actually saying we have to decide are 10,000 people going to buy this or 1,000 people going to buy this, and it's all of our livelihoods if we get it wrong, which is the kind of decisions that Moog have to make, that Dave Smith has to make. Those are really big, serious, difficult decisions. And that is another thing that really doesn't affect Behringer.
I was going to say,
Behringer chuck out a synth that nobody really fancies. They sell them off cheap, and then
they have so many aspects to their business. Like the synth thing is, for them, I think is a very small deal. But unfortunately, the only thing that concerns me is if, for example, what happens if, when, ? There's a little Behringer module with a knob and a 16 selector switch and a clicky thing. What then? And would that mean that you just don't release any of this because you just, what's the point? It becomes infinitely those risks that you're talking about become far more pronounced.
Yeah, for me those are much more. But then, or it's if that then. But I think we are in an unusual position because Thonk has a very, very specific audience, which is DIY. And I think it's interesting how we haven't particularly felt any need or goal. So we've never sold anything in ready-made.
Yeah. Even still, there's no ready-made.
No, and there's a interesting story which I'll tell you once the microphone is off that has caused us to need to produce a bunch of ready-made stuff. And it's quite a faff, we literally have to find the makers around the country and go, can you make me some of these?
You need to actually pay people to put them
together. We literally have...
You can't just... isn't there a big machine you can just put it in and it spits out a polished, tested module?
Paying a bunch of people to make some modules because we've needed them for something. And, but in terms of as a business, we're not... Well, Steve would know better than me, but I think when we look at it, we have a niche that makes sense. And there's no particular need or urgency for us to, we obviously thought about doing ready-made stuff years ago.
Talking about it for ages.
But it doesn't especially feel like it's particularly...
It's not like anyone's struggled to get hold of one of these things.
Yeah, if you want one, you can get one. And it's quite nice having that community of people who make them. But it's not like we're suddenly going to sell 10 or 20 times as many.
Yeah.
We are bigger fish in a very specific sea. Whereas if we were trying to compete with those, the market's not that much bigger, I don't think. I don't know, but it's interesting that model, which I think funk has, which is a very specific community and a very specific audience, and you're trying to do something that makes sense for them. We're not going out and trying to do get our stuff sold in Guitar Center or in, Amazon or whatever. So it's slightly different.
Wow. Good luck. This is the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Beep.
So, that was me and Tom in Herne Hill in the shed after I'd had no chicken. I hadn't had chicken that time. That time, Tom, in fact, gave me a delicious ham and cheese sandwich in which to aid my hangover. And they have got wicked good delis in Herne Hill because that was tasty ham and cheese. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the ham and cheese. Thank you for the conversation and the cup of teas. I wish you all the best for 2021. 2021? Yes. Well, that's when I'll next talk to you, if we're all still here. Now, the whole thing that Tom mentioned about getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that piqued my interest, my ears, because actually that is something that I have attempted to do. I found that incredibly difficult recently, owing to the tiny little beautiful human who disturbs our sleep during the evenings. So it's really hard to get a proper night's sleep. But note that Tom did so much stuff, developed a whole book, developed loads of modules, really interesting ideas. And what he did was get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. If you don't have a small child, I highly recommend it. The times that I have been able to do that successfully, and I have been a couple, in fact, last podcast and parts of this podcast I have worked on at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's incredible. I always consider myself to be a night owl. I don't think that's true. I read the Why We Sleep book, and people who are night owls, that is a genuine biological imprinted thing. They really do not get tired until later, and they really are not ready to get up when everyone else is getting up. It's actually a huge disadvantage to an enormous part of the population because school and work is totally gamed around a getting up early principle, which completely doesn't apply to a whole section of society, and it's biological. They cannot do anything about it. I am not one of those people. I do not actually need to sleep in. The problem is that as a creative person, and I'm sure you are exactly the same, is when it's late and everyone else has gone to bed, you're just like, this is my time. Open Ableton Live, pick up my synths, plug in my CV cables. Now I'm going to do some music. And then suddenly before you realize it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And then you're like, oh crap, like I actually have to get up in the morning. So the trick is though, you have to go to bed at like 11. If you can go to bed at 11, and you should apparently get 8 hours sleep, that is important. But, 10, 11, if you can do that, then get up at 6 o'clock. There's a couple of gadgets that, we're all about the gadgets, right? So I got the Fitbit Flex 2, the Fitbit Flex. You might have noticed it in one of my videos because I was wearing it. Basically, the Fitbit Flex is quite good. A, is a step counter and it reminds you to get off your fat butt. But also it is a silent alarm too. It will silently on your wrist, and it's got like a 5-day battery life. So it's not like an Apple Watch that you won't be wearing because you'll be charging it. It's quite good, and you can get them secondhand for like next to nothing. But the other thing, which I bought, which is completely ludicrous, but there's nowhere else I can talk about this, and if I speak to my wife about it, she thinks I'm a freaking crazy person. I bought this thing called a Lumi sleep mask. Illumi, yes, ILLUMY smart sleep mask, by a company called Sound Oasis. And it is a totally crackers concept that I invented in my mind and then discovered someone has actually made it. And basically, it's a sleep mask, and you put it on and it blacks out your vision, obviously, but it contains a little circuit board and a set of LED lights. And as you're probably guessing what happens, you program it and it beams light in your eyes at your chosen time. So it's designed to wake you up with light, which is the best way to wake up. So if you do live alone, or you live with a groovy partner who doesn't mind you blaring like sunlight into the room at 6 o'clock in the morning, by all means get one of those like bedside lamps. But if you have a child and a wife who has probably been up several times tending the child during the night, she will not appreciate being woken up when she doesn't need to be. So the sleep mask is good. Like, it's okay, although it kind of slips around a bit in the night, and so doesn't totally stay at your eyes. But when it does work. Like, you've got beaming like white light in your eyes, and it perks you up. It really does wake you up. And it's because if you read the Why We Sleep book, you've got like this little nerve that's basically strapped to the back of your eyes, and that takes a little tap from the eyes and says, are the eyes getting light? If so, turn off all of the sleep mechanisms and wake up human. And when it's dark, the reverse happens. So you should be in the dark to sleep, and you should be, if you look at light, it will wake you up. So yes, this is all a very complicated way of saying it is amazing. If you can do it, you've got like this unfettered at least hour. You know, you can get a lot done, like an hour and a half, 2 hours at best. And then it's like your time. It's like the evening time. You're just completely free to do your thing. It's great. And you're also fresh. I don't know, maybe I'm old, but like staying up late, there's just a point where you're like, I'm tired. I've been at work all day long. I had dinner. We've bathed, we've done all of this stuff. It's just like, I'm tired. Do you know what I mean? And so as Tom says, you get your evenings back. You can actually like guilt-free, like play a computer game and do something. It's just like, it's good. So I'd highly recommend it if you can. So that's it. Buy things you want from any company you like. Do the thing. Stay safe. Enjoy making electronic music somewhere in your hole, maybe at 6 o'clock in the morning. Thanks to our sponsors, Signal Sounds. Thanks to Tom for your time. Go and buy music things. There's wonderful kits. There's new things coming, but there's obviously the glorious Turing machine, the radio music, and a whole manner of other things. The clay-inspired Volts expander for the Turing machine. I really need to dig into that. That's some good stuff. Go buy his things. He's a good man. He deserves support. Support cool things. And now I say thank you for your attention. I'll try not to be so long on the next one. You're the best. Thanks. Bye.